How could you do this to me, John? I can still hear myself shouting those words like it happened yesterday, even though it's been over a year now. I was 6 months pregnant, standing in the doorway of our living room, trembling from head to toe, my hands curled into fists as my voice cracked with fury and disbelief. And John? He didn't flinch. He just stood there, arms folded, face like stone, like I was the problem. That was the moment everything shattered, the moment I realized the life I thought we were building was nothing more than a carefully spun lie. My name is Melissa Harper. I'm 32 now, raising my 1-year-old daughter, Emma, on my own. Life looks nothing like I imagined it would, but in many ways, it's become something stronger. A little over a year ago, I was blindsided, betrayed by the two people I thought I could trust the most. And as my world collapsed, I had no choice but to find a way forward, with a baby girl on the way and no one left to lean on. Those early weeks were the darkest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Heard his voice echoing in my head, saying the cruelest words I'd ever heard from someone who once claimed to love me. I'm not attracted to you anymore, Melissa. Look at you. You've let yourself go. He said that to me, while I was carrying his child. And Julia. Julia didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye afterward. My best friend, the one I confided in, the one who threw baby shower ideas around just weeks before. I never confronted her, I didn't need to. She was already out of my life the moment Karen told me the truth. I erased her like a name on a chalkboard. I carried Emma through the rest of my pregnancy completely alone. John disappeared without a word, not a single call, not a cent, not even to ask if Emma was okay. My mom tried her best to support me, and I love her for that, but I could see it in her eyes, how helpless she felt watching me struggle. I smiled for her, told her I was fine. But at night, once the house was quiet, I'd sob into my pillow until sleep finally silenced the ache. It all started unraveling the day Karen showed up unannounced. She looked pale, nervous, like she'd seen a ghost. I opened the door and barely had time to say hello before she stepped inside and said, "Melissa, I need to talk to you." She hesitated, like she was trying to protect me and destroy me at the same time. I saw John today, with Julia. They were leaving a hotel together. And they kissed, Melissa. In the hallway. I didn't want to believe it, but I saw it with my own eyes. My stomach dropped. I blinked at her, not fully grasping the words. John. Julia. Hotel. I asked every question I could form through the shock. Where? When? Are you sure? But I knew Karen wouldn't come to me with something like this if it weren't true. Why would you be at a hotel? I asked, clinging to any thread of denial. Are you sure this isn't just a misunderstanding? Karen looked at me, her expression filled with pity. My cousins are visiting. They're staying at that hotel. I was heading to their room when I saw John and Julia come out of a room, together. They didn't see me. But they kissed, right there in the hallway. Melissa. I'm so sorry. But I couldn't keep this from you. Hearing it again, stated so plainly, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My knees gave out, and I sank onto the couch, unable to speak. I felt like the air had been sucked from the room. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded, and my vision blurred with tears. The man I was building a future with, and the woman I once called family, had done this. Behind my back. While I was carrying our child. I couldn't understand how people I loved so deeply could betray me so cruelly, and at a time when I was most vulnerable. But that was the day everything changed. That was the moment I stopped believing their silence meant safety, and started rebuilding my life from the ashes they left behind. A tidal wave of emotion crashed over me, anger, humiliation, heartbreak, all tangled into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. Every memory we'd made, every whispered promise, every plan for our future unraveled in an instant, like a cruel joke I was the last to understand. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if I had been blind. Had I missed the signs? Or was I really just that easy to leave behind? The weight of it all pressed down on my chest, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I was breaking. That night, I waited. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I just sat in silence, counting the seconds until I heard his car in the driveway. My stomach twisted as I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. The door opened, and in walked John, tie loosened, jacket slung over his arm, like nothing had happened. Like he wasn't living a double life. He reached for the counter to drop his keys. "How long has it been, John?" He froze, his hand halfway to the surface. Slowly, he looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to caution. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice flat, rehearsed. "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice tight. "Karen saw you at the hotel. With Julia." His jaw clenched. "Karen?" he scoffed. "That woman's unstable. She probably saw someone else and jumped to conclusions. Melissa, come on, don't let your imagination run away with you." But he wouldn't look me in the eye. "Don't lie to me, John," I snapped, my voice cracking. "She saw you leave a hotel room with Julia. She saw you kiss her. Don't stand there and insult my intelligence with that garbage." He threw up his hands, pacing like he was the one being attacked. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," he barked. "Julia and I are just friends. Karen sees what she wants to see. You're being paranoid." Every word was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. As he rattled off his excuses, I felt something stir inside me. Emma. She moved gently, like she could sense the chaos erupting around her. I pressed my hand to my stomach instinctively, trying to ground myself. And then the anger gave way to something deeper. Sadness. Crushing, all-consuming sorrow. "Do you even care about us, John?" I whispered, my voice raw. "Do you care about her?" His eyes darted toward my stomach, but the hardness in his face didn't change. "This isn't about the baby," he said, flat and cold. "Stop trying to turn this into something bigger than it is." And just like that, I knew. I was on my own. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall, not in front of him. "More dramatic," I repeated, the words dripping from my lips like poison. "I'm 6 months pregnant, John. And you think it's not dramatic that you're sleeping with my best friend? That you've shattered our family before our daughter even has a chance to be born?" My voice rose, the heartbreak twisting into a rage I couldn't hold back anymore. "You've lied. You've cheated. And now you're standing here, telling me I'm the problem for reacting?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, I finally understood what kind of man John really was. And who I would have to become to survive this. John let out an exaggerated sigh, like he was the one who had been wronged. "Melissa, you're seriously overreacting," he said, shaking his head in frustration. "Julia and it just happened, okay? I can't control how I feel. Things between us haven't been right for a long time, and honestly, just look at yourself. You've changed." He gestured toward me, his eyes cold and filled with disdain. "I'm just not attracted to you anymore. I'm sorry, but that's the truth." The words hit like a slap, but he wasn't done. Not even close. He scoffed, then let out a bitter laugh. "Jesus, Melissa. Do you even hear yourself? You've been impossible to live with ever since you got pregnant. Every single day it's something, your back hurts, your feet are swollen, you're exhausted. Yeah, I get it, you're pregnant, but you act like you're the first woman on earth to ever carry a baby. You want a medal for it? Because from where I'm standing, it just looks pathetic." I flinched, but he kept going, relentless. He scanned me from head to toe, the look in his eyes turning venomous. "And don't even get me started on how you look," he sneered. "You've ballooned, Melissa. You're huge. You waddle around this house like a damn elephant. Honestly, it's embarrassing. You don't even try anymore. It's just those same ugly sweatpants and your greasy hair shoved up in that stupid bun. What happened to you?" He smirked cruelly, as if he was proud of what he was saying. Julia? She's beautiful. She knows how to take care of herself. She's fun. She doesn't spend every day whining about heartburn or hormones. She actually makes me feel alive again. You? You're just exhausting. I'm done pretending you're not dragging me down. His words were knives, sharp and calculated, and each one cut deeper than the last. I stood there, stunned, my mouth slightly open, unable to move or even breathe. My body went rigid with shock, my mind scrambling to catch up to what I'd just heard. He didn't even try to deny what he had done. He didn't bother with fake apologies or shallow regrets. He stood there, emotionally vacant, delivering a monologue of cruelty like it was no big deal. And the worst part? I had braced myself for excuses, for pathetic justifications. But I hadn't prepared for this, for him to break me down piece by piece. The man I had built a life with, the man I thought I knew, was gone. Replaced with someone cold, unrecognizable, and so deeply cruel it made my stomach turn. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I clenched my jaw, determined not to cry. I wouldn't give him that power. Not here. Not now. You don't care, I whispered, barely able to form the words. Not about me, not about Emma, not about anything we had. John shrugged like I'd just stated a boring fact. I've moved on, Melissa, he said flatly. Maybe you should too. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. The last confirmation I needed that the man I once loved, who once held me in his arms and promised forever, was long gone. The next morning, I packed everything I could fit into 2 battered suitcases. I left behind the rest, the wedding photos, the nursery we had painted together, the life that was now nothing but ash. Every step I took through that house felt like dragging myself through broken glass. Every corner whispered memories I didn't want to remember. I didn't look back. My mom had offered weeks ago to let me stay with her, just in case, she said gently. I had smiled at the time, thinking I wouldn't need it. But now I clung to the hope of that lifeline like it was the only thing keeping me afloat. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already standing at the door, arms open, eyes filled with worry and love. The moment I stepped out of the car, she rushed to me and pulled me into her arms. Oh, sweetheart, she murmured, holding me close. And just like that, the dam broke. I crumbled into her shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably, shaking from the weight of all I had kept buried. I cried for the betrayal, for the humiliation, for the future I thought I had and the man I didn't recognize anymore. She didn't let go. She just held me tighter, rocking gently as if I were a child again. It's going to be okay, Melissa, she whispered into my hair. You and Emma, you're going to be okay. You're not alone. I'm here. I've got you. And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. I felt safe. Shattered, but safe. And maybe, just maybe, that was a place to start healing. The days at my mom's house were quieter, but that didn't make them easier. She did her best to lift my spirits, cooking my favorite meals, sitting with me in the evenings, carefully steering every conversation away from John. But when she wasn't around, the silence in the house wrapped itself around me like a heavy blanket. I'd spend hours folding and refolding Emma's tiny onesies, gently running my fingers over the soft fabrics I'd once picked out with such hope. Back then, I imagined placing them into drawers in a home I thought would be filled with love and partnership. Now, they were a quiet reminder that everything had changed. There were moments I'd pick up my phone, thumb hovering over John's name. I wanted to call him, scream at him, ask him how he could just walk away from me, from her. But every time, I stopped myself. What was the point? He had shown me exactly who he was. He made his choice, and it wasn't us. So instead, I turned all my energy inward, toward Emma. I reminded myself, over and over again, that she was the reason I had to keep going. I wouldn't let him break me. After a few weeks, it was like John had vanished. No texts. No calls. Not a single inquiry about the baby. Nothing. It was as if we'd been erased from his life, like we'd never existed. At first, I checked my phone constantly, half hoping, half dreading that he might reach out. But eventually, I stopped. The silence was easier to handle than the thought of him showing up only to disappoint me again. I packed away the last traces of him, our photos, his shirts, anything that still carried the faintest scent of him, and shoved the box into the back of the closet. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about him, not with longing, but with disbelief. How does someone disappear so completely from their own child's life before she's even born? It was as if he had never existed. But his absence echoed through everything I did, loud and sharp in the quiet spaces of motherhood I had to fill alone. The months dragged on. Each one heavier than the last. Pregnancy wasn't kind to me. I was drained, sore, and overwhelmed. My mom was a godsend, always there with a warm meal or a reassuring hug, but there were nights when I cried silently into my pillow, wondering how it all fell apart so fast. The guilt crept in, too. I hadn't planned to bring a child into the world like this, without a father, without the life I thought she deserved. But every time she moved, a little kick or flutter deep inside me, I remembered why I was still standing. Emma was my purpose now. She was the light guiding me through the dark. And then she arrived. The moment they placed her on my chest, I felt something shift in me, something massive. She was perfect. Pink cheeks, wide curious eyes, tiny fingers that wrapped around mine like she already knew I needed her just as much as she needed me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel shattered. I felt whole. It didn't matter that John wasn't there. It didn't matter that he had chosen to walk away. Because this little girl in my arms, was everything. The first few weeks flew by in a blur of bottle feedings, diaper changes, and stolen naps. I barely had time to process what had happened, let alone dwell on it. Emma consumed my every waking thought. Her eyes, so bright, so full of life, would follow my every move. And in those quiet, sacred moments, I knew we were going to be okay. My mom helped a lot, and I was grateful beyond words. But I insisted on doing as much as I could on my own. I needed to prove, maybe to myself more than anyone else, that I could do this without John. That I was doing it. Sometimes, the loneliness crept in. I'd be at the grocery store and catch a father gently bouncing his baby in a carrier, or hear a friend talk about her partner waking up for midnight feedings, and a deep ache would settle in my chest. But then Emma would smile at me, wide and gummy and full of love, and it would all fade away. She was my world. And in her eyes, I saw the future I had built. One without John. One stronger than I ever thought I could be. Weeks had passed, and life with Emma was finally starting to settle into something close to manageable. When my mom offered to watch her for a few hours, I didn't hesitate. It had been so long since I'd stepped out alone that the idea of walking through the world untethered felt almost foreign. The mall was buzzing, fluorescent lights glinting off polished tile floors. People bustled past me with shopping bags and lattes, their conversations blending into a dull hum of everyday life. For the first time in months, I felt separate from the chaos. Not lost, just observing. A little cracked, maybe, but still standing. I wandered through a few baby stores, picking out a couple of soft onesies for Emma. It was the first time in a while I felt something like peace. And then, Melissa. I froze. The voice came from behind me, fragile but unmistakable. I turned slowly, and my heart slammed into my ribs. Julia. Her face was pale, eyes red and glassy, with a slight swell beneath her loose sweater. She looked nothing like the woman who had ripped my world apart. There was no polished confidence, no smug tilt to her chin. Just a trembling, broken mess. Before I could say a word, she rushed toward me, her hand reaching for mine. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears already falling. I stood frozen as she clung to my arm, sobbing like a child. Her voice cracked as she stumbled over her words. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," she said, her shoulders heaving, "but I have to tell you. John, he left. After everything. He lost his job not long after we moved in together. Then came the drinking, the gambling, he spiraled. And when I told him I was pregnant, he just walked out. Said he couldn't handle it. She covered her face with both hands, her sobs drawing the glances of strangers as they passed. I don't know what to do. I don't have anyone. Melissa, I am so sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. She collapsed into tears right there in the middle of the mall, pleading with me through gasps and hiccups. Please, she begged. I know I can't fix what I did. But I ruined everything, and I wish more than anything that I could take it back. I need your forgiveness. Just, something. Anything. I stared at her, this version of Julia I never imagined I'd see. Small. Shattered. I had spent so long picturing this moment, imagining her regret, her apology. I thought it would bring me closure. Maybe even satisfaction. But standing there, looking at her, there was nothing. Not anger. Not pity. Not peace. Just stillness. Without a word, I stepped around her and walked away. I didn't look back. When I pulled into my driveway later that evening, a strange stillness hung in the air. For a second, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Sitting on the front steps, hunched over like a man who had nowhere else to go, was John. He looked like a ghost of himself, unkempt, pale, reeking of failure. His shirt was stained, his eyes red, and the sour stench of alcohol reached me before he even opened his mouth. Melissa, he muttered, unsteadily getting to his feet. I needed to see you. I stopped in my tracks, the weight of disbelief anchoring me in place. What the hell are you doing here? I snapped. My voice was sharper than I intended, but not sharper than he deserved. He leaned against the doorframe, swaying slightly. I'm sorry, he slurred. I love you. I love Emma. Please, let me come home. I'll fix it. I'll fix everything. His words stumbled out like broken glass. But all I felt was ice. No part of me wanted to hear his promises. Not after what he'd done. Not after he'd abandoned us both. The man in front of me wasn't someone I could trust, or even recognize. And as I stood there, with my daughter safe inside, I knew the only door John would be walking through tonight was the one behind him. Sorry? I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. You're sorry? You left me, left us, without even looking back, and now you show up at my door, reeking of liquor, talking about how sorry you are? Talking about love? John rubbed a hand down his face and through his unkempt hair, like even he couldn't bear to look at himself. His shoulders sagged, his body folding in on itself as if crushed by the weight of everything he'd lost. I know, Melissa, he whispered, voice cracking. I know I messed up. I've lost everything, you, Emma, my job, my savings. I've been a fool. But I haven't stopped thinking about what I threw away. I love you. I love Emma. Please, just give me a chance to make things right. I stood there frozen, staring at the man I used to love, the man who once held my hand and talked about forever. Now, he looked like a ghost of himself, hollowed out, haunted. And yet, all I could feel was a tangled mess of rage, sorrow, and disbelief. You love us? I said slowly, my voice unsteady but sharp. Where was that love when I was 6 months pregnant and you walked out the door? When I gave birth alone, holding our daughter for the first time while you were God knows where? You abandoned us, John. You chose to disappear. You don't just get to show up now and act like the wounded one. He swayed slightly, catching the doorframe to keep himself upright. His eyes, bloodshot and glistening with tears, met mine. I know, he said again, barely a whisper. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I've changed. Or, I'm trying to. Please, Melissa. Just let me be in Emma's life. I'll do whatever it takes. Anything. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burning. There was a part of me, the part that remembered the man he used to be, that wanted to believe him. That wanted to reach out, if only to comfort the broken person in front of me. But then I remembered every sleepless night. Every tear. Every bill I paid alone. Every appointment, every milestone, every lonely moment I'd navigated without him. I straightened my spine and forced myself to breathe. "No, John," I said, calm but resolute. "You don't get to come back in just because your world fell apart. Emma and I, we're better off without you. You made your choice the day you walked out. Now you have to live with it." His face crumpled, and he sank down onto the porch steps, burying his face in his hands. The sobs that escaped him were quiet but raw, echoing into the silence of the night. And for one fleeting moment, I did feel a pang of sympathy. But not enough to open that door again. I turned, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside, shutting it gently behind me. I leaned against it, exhaling shakily as the weight of the evening pressed down. In just one day, both John and Julia, the two people who had nearly destroyed my life, had come crawling back, hollowed out by the very choices that once broke me. I hadn't lifted a single finger. Karma had done the work on its own. And me? I was still standing. I made my way upstairs, quiet as a breath, and peeked into Emma's room. She was fast asleep, her tiny form curled peacefully beneath the covers, her chest rising and falling in that gentle rhythm that only babies have. The night light cast a soft golden glow over her sweet face, and I felt something shift in my chest. I walked over and leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're okay, baby girl," I whispered. "We're going to be just fine." This, was my purpose now. My future. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it was going to be beautiful.